What's up, dudes and dudes of the internet? My name's Scythe, and oh man, today we finally have a little bit more information about the subclass abilities and how they're going to end up working in Trove. Now, granted, this update for the subclasses is not anytime soon. It's maybe 3 months or more away from here in June. We'll see what ends up happening with it. But essentially what the subclasses are going to end up doing, if you didn't check out my other video, is you're going to be able to go into the character selection screen right here, and as we're on the Shadow Hunter, we're going to be able to click on a little icon on any of the other characters that's going to make us subclass that character. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that's actually going to do, but I just want to get this perspective out there, just how cool this is, because it means that Trove is finally going to actually have different builds, folks. I'm very, very excited to actually talk about this, because lots of people like to say that Trove has different builds and character builds and stuff like that in the game, but generally speaking, all you really can do in this game is build your character towards DPS, damage per second, and a tank. And that's pretty much it. Certain characters, like say the Chloromancer, for example, is going to be both. So you can build it towards damage or a tank, or the Tomb Raiser can be a damage or tank. There's not really anything in between. It's just damage or tank. Now, the thing that's actually really cool is that the subclass abilities are potentially going to add actual class builds where you don't just focus on like the specific stats. You're going to be able to mix and match. Like there's how many different characters? There's 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different classes that are going to be able to have 14 different abilities that they can take from all the other characters. Now, if we're on the Shadow Hunter and we subclass Gunslinger, we're going to end up gaining a different ability from the Gunslinger, but you can only have one subclass active at a time. Now, one thing that I'm a bit confused about, just because of the way that the devs ended up explaining it, is I always assumed that what they were saying was you can only have one subclass active on any character, period. Meaning that if I wanted to swap over to the Neon Ninja, I would have to swap to the Neon Ninja and then choose a subclass afterwards. Now, I don't know if that's what they meant, or if they just mean that you can only have one subclass ability on each of the characters, which I would hope that something like that, something that you could kind of equip on another character, and then you wouldn't have to constantly swap it out. But in any case, enough about all the hype train of getting all that out of the way. The fact of the matter is that the devs have confirmed that the ability you're going to end up getting as a subclass is it's going to be a passive ability. So if we end up subclassing the Revenant on the Shadow Hunter, we're going to get a passive ability that potentially is going to either trigger just on like a random cooldown, where it's just gonna, well, I don't mean to say random, but I'm just assuming it's going to end up being something that's gonna have a constant effect, or it's going to be something that's going to trigger in combat, which makes a little bit more sense to me rather than the over elaborate system that we were all thinking and talking about together. Because this means something more like, it's kind of like another flask effect or something like that, right? So hopefully it's going to end up working out and actually being something fancy, because otherwise that makes me a little bit curious, because last time we talked about how the Draco was actually using the Mage as its sub ability, and it actually had the Mage, or the Ice Sage's, like his ice barrier was around the Draco, right? So what makes me curious about that is if it's going to end up being a passive ability, does that mean that it's just constantly going to be on the Draco? Maybe you take a hit and then it's going to be on a cooldown and then it's going to auto cast? Or is it going to simply cast every time you get into combat? Which, if it's going to be something like that, unfortunately, that would actually be very, very lame, because in most instances, especially when you're in U9, you're gonna kill all the enemies before the subclass ability has a chance to actually trigger. Now, they did talk about a few of the different subclass abilities for some of the characters. For example, if you subclass the Tomb Raiser on any other character, you're actually going to have minions be summoned while you're in the middle of battle. So instantly, that already has, I was talking with a couple of the other like officers and stuff like that, and people that I'm close to, about like what could end up happening with that. What if we ended up going on the Dino Tamer and subclassing the Tomb Raiser? Suddenly we'd have dinosaurs and little skeleton allies all over the place covering everything. Not to mention, I wonder whether or not it would end up being something where you could end up using the minion emblem effect, where it's going to end up making the minions actually do more damage or something like that. I don't know. The other thing, too, which I'm a little bit worried about, is probably going to be a bug day one, is if you're a physical character and you subclass the Tomb Raiser, are the allies, like the little minions, are they going to scale based on physical damage, or are they going to be glitched out and only take effect from the magical damage? So hopefully that's something that the devs ended up actually thinking about, because stuff like that usually does end up happening day one. But it made me very curious. You know, even the Boom Raiser could end up, or Boom Raiser, the I guess the Boomeranger with the Tomb Raiser ability would be the Boom Raiser, right? We could come up with all sorts of new, like, names for the classes by having, like, a different character kind of with a subclass. Maybe we could even have that as, like, the Boom Raiser could be like the Boomerang or Tomb Raiser subclass build, you know? And we could kind of scale around that. I'm really, really curious to see what ends up happening with all that. That's gonna be so, so cool, dude. But imagine, like, your chicken allies along with all of the Tomb Raiser minions and stuff. And I'm just assuming it's gonna be the Tomb Raiser minions. Maybe it's gonna be something else. They did say that the Boomeranger's subclass ability is going to end up being something very, very cute. I assume it's going to be related to the chickens. Somehow it's going to be related to the Boomeranger's chickens, because honestly, I don't know what else it would end up being if they're going to have something like that. They also did end up mentioning, one of my favorites is that subclassing the Revenant is actually going to give you a taunt. So we could finally potentially have tanks in this game, because even though I say that there's two different builds, damage or tank, the tanks in this game are extremely underwhelming. You don't really have any way of taking aggro other than doing, like, little tricks of having, like, you know, if you want to tank as the Candy Barb or the Revenant or something, pretty much you're going to have to attack the enemy first so that you take the aggro, and then hopefully everybody else can stay far enough away so that the enemy doesn't end up losing aggro and going against the other character, right? With the Revenant, however, your right-click shield bash is going to actually taunt the enemies, but even then, it's very unreliable. So that potentially is a very big game changer, because if you can get a taunt on any of the other characters, then potentially you can end up having a very, very weird build of having any of the other characters trying to actually be a tank. Now, of course, some of the other characters would end up being very, very proficient at this. I could see the Draco, because of the fact that his little flamethrower can tag all of the enemies in front of him. I think that that crowd control could actually end up making it a very tanky character, as opposed to the Shadowhunter. Doesn't really have that much AoE, so how would that end up working? Would that end up actually being something worthwhile that you would want to actually throw together? I don't know. Then they did also mention, just kind of passively, that the Neon Ninja's subclass ability is going to be some type of an assassinate ability. So that's the thing that has me very excited, is it sounds like some of these subclass abilities are going to just be an existing ability taken from the character and put onto a different class, while some of the other abilities are going to end up being something new and unique. So an assassinate ability from the Neon Ninja sounds like it's not going to be any of his abilities, and in fact going to end up being something completely different that's going to end up applying to the characters. Maybe it's going to be something like the first hit you do on an enemy is going to do more damage, or I don't know, because even though an assassinate ability makes sense for sneaking up on enemies or stealthing them, maybe if you attack an enemy, you'll go invisible and do extra damage or something like that. I don't know, because it's definitely not going to be the assassination ability from other games where you would backstab an enemy, because there is no backs to any of the enemies. They just instantly turn around and start attacking you and stuff like that anyways. But either way, very, very cool that they ended up talking about that a little bit more. They're going to talk more about it in the future. And again, this is really, really big news that all these abilities are going to end up being something passive, because the first time we talked about it, we were very unsure what was going to end up happening with all of your hotkeys. Was one of them going to end up changing? Was it going to end up replacing a current ability you had on the character? I don't know. Which also, again, with it being a passive ability, makes me hope and wonder what the Shadowhunters is going to be. Are you going to get Shadow Mark? Because again, if you could Shadow Mark, put Shadow Mark on the Gunslinger, put it on the Neon Ninja, even put it on the Candy Barb, oh man, that would be a powerful combination. You'd be able to right click and just kill everything, dude. Like, seriously, very, very awesome. So there was a couple other things that they ended up talking about. They also said that with these systems in place, they could potentially end up adding some more skills a little bit later on for the whole subclass thing, which I'm assuming when they talked about that, I think that more so they mean about when they add more characters to the game, because they are still planning to add more classes to the game eventually. Honestly, who knows what's going to happen with that. I would like to see, as far as builds are concerned, I would like to see one of the abilities be maybe like a life leech. Maybe one of them could end up being like a passive stun ability, so that you can end up kind of doing something crazy with that. And last but not least, this is not actually related to the subclasses, but I did think that it was worthwhile to actually talk about. The Fade Trickster's class gem ability is getting a rework. They said that they have completely overhauled it. They're kind of making it something a lot better. And in a lot of ways, they said that it might even be a little bit OP, which is great, because even though, you know, in my videos it might sound like I'm kind of hating on the Fade Trickster a little bit, it's not that I'm hating on the Fade Trickster, it's that the current build of the Fade Trickster is not really viable. It doesn't really work compared to the other characters. The Fade Trickster is one of the characters where all they need to do is tweak it, you know, and readjust it and get that class gem ability to be something a little bit better, as opposed to the Knight, where I would like to see him reworked from the ground up. And actually, I was talking with Mark Underscore, and we kind of had this cool concept where it's like, it would be nice to have the Knight maybe as a faster hitting character, where maybe he would focus more on being in combat and taking damage, would end up reducing the cooldown of his abilities or something like that, so that you could kind of have him as a constant fighter. And then it would be nice to have another character, maybe even the Shadow Hunter, to actually have a little bit of life leech, because then that would compensate for the survivability of the class would end up going up, which would mean that you wouldn't necessarily have to have extra damage on the Shadow Hunter as much. Was there anything else? No, I think that's pretty much it. So very, very cool that they ended up actually doing that. Apparently they did say too, you know, don't quote me on this exactly, but they did say that while you're also going to get a passive ability, your stats might change a little bit as well. So we'll see what that actually means. Hopefully they're going to elaborate on that sometime soon. But either way, very exciting news to actually hear a little bit more about the subclasses. Has me ecstatic just because of the fact that we're going to end up finally having different builds. And I'm excited, so excited to experiment with different builds myself and kind of hear feedback from you in the community, because potentially we could actually see the Neon Ninja having a run for his money as far as the fastest farming class in the game. And for the most part, I think that these subclass abilities are going to affect shadow towers more than actual farming. But we'll see what ends up happening. Again, with the subclass abilities coming out, it means that the new Hydra boss, which I did a video on recently, and it seemed like a very, very overpowered boss, potentially he'll end up becoming a lot easier as the subclass abilities end up getting added, as well as just the gem re-rolling and stuff like that. Now, again, like I said at the beginning of the video, all of this stuff, you know, is still months away. I'm expecting maybe 4 to 5 months, even though the devs actually have said 2 to 3 months. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't know. I'm assuming at least before the fall they're going to end up launching it, or maybe right on the fall. I don't know. Hopefully, we're going to at least get a whole bunch of more information, and maybe they'll end up getting the test servers up sometime soon. But whether this update is going to end up launching simultaneously on the consoles and PC at the same time, time will tell. At the least, I think it's going to be within a 1-month gap of us getting on PC and then consoles. But in any case, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let me know what you all think in the comment section below about like what some of the other passive abilities could be. I think it would be really, really cool for us to kind of like give these ideas and kind of speculate as to what's going to end up happening, because otherwise, like, what's the Lunar Lancer's ability going to be? What's the subclass ability going to be for the Gunslinger? I don't know. Very, very curious to see what ends up happening. Is the Dino Tamer going to end up giving minion summoning on another character? I don't see it, because if the Tomb Raiser's already fulfilling that role, why would you end up doing that on the Dino Tamer? Maybe you would end up just getting like a passive buff of like the minions or something like that. I don't know. Well, you know, time will tell, but it sounds really, really cool. So in any case, thank you so much for watching. Very much appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, favorite, and subscribe for more daily content. Sign on and stay epic, everybody.